Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma.
And I'm Achol.
Artificial intelligence, or AI, has become increasingly ingrained in our lives in recent years. And we've seen this technology used for both good and for bad, from life-changing medical discoveries to the rise of explicit deepfakes. But during the recent AI boom, we've heard a lot of conversations around ethics and safety. As those conversations have become more intense, there is a lesser discussed concern that is now gaining attention, and that's all about the environmental impact of AI.
AI requires immense quantities of resources, and this includes electricity, water, and finite minerals. Now, with the growing demand of AI, its carbon footprint is only expected to rise in coming decades. Now, today we're going to explore the early red flags environmental experts are raising and what they mean for the sustainability of AI.
Achol, you have gone deep on this topic for us because I think we've seen a lot of headlines floating around lately about AI not being great for the environment, but it's a confusing space to start with, let alone before we get into the specifics of this. It does feel like a really new advancement, but I was surprised when you told me AI is a term that was first coined in 1955 by an American computer scientist. His name was John McCarthy. But these days, when we're talking about AI, I think most people are probably thinking of what's called generative AI. So that's like OpenAI's ChatGPT.
Right.
So those chatbot-based systems, which are built on large language models. And that means they use these vast databases of online text and images to generate new content. Now that ChatGPT has become so incredibly popular, though, people are turning to this discussion about its demands. So, Achol, what does it actually take to power generative AI like ChatGPT?
So popular might just be an understatement. So since launching in November 2022, ChatGPT has amassed around 300 million weekly active users worldwide.
Wow.
I know. So every time someone asks ChatGPT to complete a task, it uses around 2.9 watts per hour of energy. Now, that's according to the International Energy Agency. And to really put this into perspective, a recent study found that ChatGPT consumes enough power annually to charge over 3 million electric cars or about 50 million iPhones.
Wow. I got to be honest with you, I didn't know what watts per hour of energy really meant. So that definitely helps put it into perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't either. Now, ChatGPT has dominated the AI space for the past 3 years that it's been running. However, this year we witnessed a new generative AI called DeepSeek disrupt global financial markets. And you probably saw headlines left, right, and center earlier this year. Now, the Chinese model introduced itself as a cheaper, more energy efficient alternative to its American competitors. Just like OpenAI's ChatGPT, DeepSeek can summarize text, answer questions, and generate writing based on prompts. Now, what's really fascinating about DeepSeek is that it performs just as well as the leading American AI systems, but only for a fraction of the cost, and it claims it can use up to 40 times less energy.
Yeah, this is a big claim from DeepSeek, and I think we're all kind of waiting to hear a bit more about how it plans on achieving that, or if it will really be able to offer the same service as a ChatGPT. But when we think about the environmental impact of generative AI, it's not just about this massive strain on energy grids. There are other strains on resources, right?
Yeah, that's right. Now, the resources needed to run, support, and train generative AI are housed in these facilities called data centers. While the exact figures are still being debated, it's estimated that AI data centers account for up to 1.5% of global electricity usage. That might seem small, but what that basically means is that a single data center consumes enough energy to heat 50,000 homes for a whole year.
Okay.
Now, these facilities are expected to use as much power annually as countries like Japan and Russia by next year. This raises concerns amongst experts who fear it could potentially put additional strain on electricity grids, including countries like Australia, where we are regularly experiencing blackouts.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, I guess, in places like Australia where there is that strain on grids and uncertainty about, what the long-term sustainability of those grids looks like, then this huge extra strain, it sounds like a lot of work. So, Achol, you've got these massive facilities that you've talked us through that store this large infrastructure and machinery. So we've learnt that, AI puts a strain on electricity demands because of the actual process of asking it questions. Then there's also the physical places where the computing lives. I can only imagine how hot those rooms could get. I mean, think about like when you have a small laptop on your lap, the fan is going into overdrive, it gets really hot on your lap. That's like a small laptop that generates that kind of a heat. I mean, if you've got this much machinery in these facilities, I'm sure it must get really warm.
Oh, exactly. I mean, AI centers need advanced cooling systems to basically keep the technology from overheating. Now, traditionally, data centers use air cooling to manage rising temperatures caused by the heat emitted from the hardware. However, this isn't sufficient for AI technology. So what that means is modern data centers are using liquid cooling systems that rely on water to keep temperatures between the ideal temps of 21 and 24 degrees.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this concept because the idea of water and computers pretty much goes against everything we've ever been told, right?
That's exactly right. But I wouldn't recommend throwing a glass of water at your laptop right now.
Okay, noted.
So researchers in the US predict that by 2027, up to 6.6 billion cubic meters of water will be needed to meet global AI demands. That's equivalent to half of the UK's yearly water consumption.
Okay, a lot of water then.
A lot, exactly. Now, these statistics raise concerns for climate experts who basically say in a country like Australia who experiences droughts regularly, this would be detrimental.
With droughts, I mean, if we look at the climate science, droughts are expected to intensify, those kind of long periods without rain. And this water usage, I can imagine for those climate experts, kind of sounds an alarm.
Now, water consumption isn't the only environmental issue linked to data centers. The greenhouse gas emissions released from these facilities are also sounding the alarm in the fight against global warming. Now, these exact figures on AI's contribution to global emissions still remain unclear. Now, the International Energy Agency estimates that data centers account for 0.6% of annual emissions, while Science and Technology Australia say this figure has already hit 1%.
So some kind of differences in the scale there, but anywhere between kind of 0.5% to 1% of emissions.
Exactly. Recent reports warn that if AI adoption continues at the current pace that it's going, data centers could account for up to 14% of all yearly emissions by 2040.
When we look to kind of global tech giants using AI, that prediction you can kind of get your head around. I mean, they're the ones using AI, and they've been pretty transparent, some of those big tech firms, about the relationship between AI and their company emissions. What do we know about global tech in this role?
Yeah, so in the case of Microsoft, in its latest sustainability report, it attributed a 30% increase in its carbon emissions since 2020 due to AI models and services that it provides.
Wow, so Microsoft is saying that its emissions, like the whole of Microsoft, increased by 30% because of what it takes to run AI.
Exactly that. Now, despite this, we know that tech giants have no plans on scaling back their AI programs. So basically, this means greater demand for infrastructure and resources, which brings us to mining. So lithium is one of the key materials used to produce the rechargeable batteries that powers AI technology, and Australia is one of the largest producers of the mineral.
We have heard a lot about lithium in recent years. Of course, it's something that goes in phones, computers, batteries of all kinds. And you're right, Australia is the world's largest lithium producer, but we might not be forever.
No, not exactly. A 2020 study from a German university found that global lithium deposits could be depleted sometime within the next 75 years. So, with the rapid uptake of AI services, some experts predict that lithium shortages could occur as soon as 2040.
Wow, there are so many aspects to the sustainability concerns here. We've heard about the power it takes to ask ChatGPT a question, the electricity and water it takes for these computers to be stored. And then we've also got this e-waste and the mining of lithium to think about. you're right that, AI isn't going anywhere. We are only hearing more and more about its advancements and how we can live alongside AI or integrate it into our life, into our work. But what are the experts saying about how we ensure that this technology doesn't set us back environmentally, even while it might kind of bring us forward technologically?
Well, that's exactly what global leaders are trying to figure out with the help of these environmental and technological experts. So last year in Australia, the Federal Senate launched an inquiry into AI to explore both its opportunities and its impacts. So the inquiry held 6 public hearings and received submissions from 245 experts, academics, business leaders, and members of the public.
That's a lot of submissions. Were there any kind of common themes that came up?
Yeah, so the environmental impacts of AI was a major concern basically across all submissions. And in its submissions, UNSW AI Institute noted that the impacts of AI are currently difficult to quantify due to few standards for its reporting.
Okay, so I think that's kind of been reflected in some of the numbers we've talked about today.
Exactly.
There's a bit of a range, a scope. There's not kind of a definitive regulatory body that says this is what AI is doing and these are the emissions that it's contributing and that kind of thing. So I guess that makes it difficult to get a real sense of what's going on.
That's a perfect example, right? So Science and Technology Australia, which is the peak body for Australia's science and technology sector, called on governments to ensure that renewable energy policy and net zero investments play a key role in developing digital infrastructure to support AI use in Australia. What's interesting is that recent innovations show that AI can actually help us tackle environmental challenges.
Interesting.
I know. So the Federal Department of Industry, Science and Resources showed that AI could help address some of the world's most pressing climate change issues, including by improving energy efficiency and enhancing sustainable practices.
One of the interesting ones that the federal government flagged, I remember, is how AI could be used for firefighting technologies, that they developed an AI technology that could detect small fires and predict fire behaviour patterns, which is, of course, beneficial to the environment on the other side of this coin.
Exactly. But despite that, the Australian Human Rights Commission did warn AI poses significant risk. Now, ultimately, knowledge is power. So by increasing transparency around the potential environmental impacts of AI, the risk may be mitigated.
Achol, thank you so much for breaking that down for us. A very, very big, complicated story, but you've made sense of it for us. So we thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. If you liked today's episode, if you learned something, feel free to pass it on to a friend. Don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to The Daily Aus, or if you're watching us over on our YouTube. We will be back a little bit later today with the evening headlines. Until then, have a great day.